Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. How have the past few weeks been?
Oh, it's been great here. Spring has arrived. Melbourne, where I live, a city of 5 million people, has now had, I think, 17 days without a single case of COVID. All the cafes are full up. It's a very nice space to be at the moment.
Well, yeah, starkly different scenes as winter descends on us here.
Yes, exactly. I think it's all in the history, really. You know, it isn't just a question of Trump's responsibility. The people that voted for him and the people that manipulated the media to make him look as an attractive alternative are the same people that are always going to refuse to comply with public health regulations, and they'll go on refusing to comply when Biden takes up the presidency as well. America has become an ungovernable country, quite honestly.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes through too in without any kind of strong national response, without any kind of leadership, without all of this stuff just becomes inevitable. You know, as soon as there was inaction in February or March, this was all going to be the most likely outcome. If you don't have a strong social response or a political class that can mobilize the social response, it just becomes the fucking insanity that's going on right now.
There may have been times in the past when I think FDR, the Second World War, where America showed its capacity for a communitarian kind of ethos and achieved, amazing things during that period, the 40s, 50s, early 60s. Mm-hmm. But I think it's also got rooted in its history, this stubborn libertarianism of the frontiersman, and our history is very different. Our government was paid for and run by the British Colonial Office for the first sort of 100 years, 120 years of our existence. And people looked upon the state as a service provider and never regarded the state as oppressive. And quite honestly, it had difficulty being oppressive if it tried. I mean, of course, minorities, indigenous people see it quite differently. But for the great mass of ordinary Joes and Joannes in Australia, the government is just a fairly benign protector and service provider. Mm-hmm. And we don't feel that same need. I mean, a small minority, the people that demonstrated against wearing masks in a city of 5 million was like a couple of hundred who were rounded up by the police and chased away. It's a different thing.
Yeah, the other really prominent theme right now has been sort of the post-election chaos of the very militant wing of Trump supporters, these neo-Nazi groups and fascist leaning organizations, just kind of being the stark contrast of the police apparatus actually defending them and ensuring that they have this sort, in Washington, D.C., they're able to go in, destroy public property, all of these things that, Black Lives Matter protesters are getting beaten up for by the police. I
liken it to, when teenagers get to a certain age, they start slagging off their parents, adopting values which are and practices which are completely abhorrent to their parents, denouncing their parents in all sorts of ways. And this carries on for a few years until they've separated themselves from their parental sort of social environment and values and established themselves independently. And then they'll come back and say, oh, Mum and Dad, I haven't seen you for a while. I really do love you and everything's okay. It's like the American workers have been done over by both Republican and Democrat administrations since Reagan's day. And the graphs of productivity versus real incomes show this very sharply, that they just parted, when Reagan came into power, real income slightly declined and never recovered, and productivity just kept going up. And so there's understandable resentment and hatred, but because of the social environment, the media environment, and that really, entrenched, powerful right-wing cabal, people haven't been able to formulate an alternative. So their erstwhile protectors, in the Democrat Party, the people that are supposed to be sticking up for the people at the bottom of the heap, have become the enemy. And I get from my American contacts who like Trump, they know he's a liar and a fool. I mean, I know some don't, but many do. They find him disgusting, but they hate the Democrats even more. And they'd rather have, this idiot in charge and coronavirus and everything than let people that they hate carry on, because, they see themselves being screwed over. And it's irrational. It's absolutely irrational. And who knows where it's going to end? You can't predict that.
Yeah, that was, I was honestly surprised that Biden won, just because the Democratic Party is so good. I'm trying to think of a good, I'm not sure of a good international sports term, but essentially just the idea of where, like, the home team has, like, the lead, it's theirs to take away, and in the final minute they just collapse and find, like, some way against all odds to lose. Like, this seems to be like they're like the narrative of the Democratic Party. But they did, they managed to pull it off.
Given that the Democrats lost seats in the Congress and made no gains in the Senate, you have to say it's only Republican supporters that just couldn't take Trump that allowed Biden to get win. I mean, the figures are very clear. There was no, 75 million votes, that's great. That Trump generated a lot of interest in who's running the country, and people voted in numbers which are for you guys unprecedented.
Right.
But there was no shift to the Democrats. There was just people in states that voted for Biden also voted for a Republican congressman.
Yeah,
we wanted to talk about some things apart from America.
Well, so that does lead me into it, because I've been thinking about it. It's kind of like in terms similar to what you're saying with the teenage analogy of and I guess the words that I was using when I was thinking through it was kind of like the Vygotskian idea of social situation of development. You have the ideal form of the skill. You have the primitive form of the skill. Usually it's the parent-child dynamic. And so that's how I was thinking through some of these things with the Democratic Party, because the progressive turnout, especially in like Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Detroit, really important for them. And I think it more connects to what you talk about in the sense of solidarity. So that was kind of where a lot of my thoughts were running into, of modeling, so an ideal form of what solidarity looks like. And I don't think what we're seeing right now in America is any sense of that. So the goal would then be to establish what are the characteristics of that ideal form.
Just to take up a couple of themes there. Firstly, to take up the metaphor of child development. Of course, child development is unique in compared to any other form of development because the ideal form is present. And the distinctive feature of the development of the American working class and left at the moment is the ideal form is not present. That's right. The point. They have no model or image of how they could live differently. Whereas the child in growing up has always present a model of the norms and of how they should live. The breach from their parents, which I used in a metaphor, is, of course, that they don't have a sufficient model to break from their parents. They're aware that there are other ways of living. They know this through their friends, through the news, through culture generally, that their parents are one of a number of available ethoses, whatever the plural of ethos is, and they have to break irrationally in order to have the experiences and learn about other ways of living. But those ways of living, that other ethos is there, and they have to immerse themselves in it in order to develop on their own feet. And on their own feet means, of course, not that they invent a way of living for themselves, but they discover in the world around them a model that they can grow into. Now, the other thing you mentioned is, of course, solidarity. As you'd be aware, what I've gained from my study of Hegel and Vygotsky is the concept of a germ cell or a unit of analysis, what Hegel calls that simple something, which is that simple concrete something, which captures the universal of a phenomenon. So I think about socialism. What is that simple something, that concrete concept which grasps socialism? And it is solidarity. And you look back historically, solidarity originated in Paris of the 1830s, when it wasn't a known idea, and workers defended their own street, and the army simply marched from one street to the next and defeated each barricade one at a time. And Auguste Blanqui railed against this and insisted on solidarity. And when the French delegation arrived at the Chartist Conference in 1848, they introduced this idea of solidarity. And, of course, this principle was well known to the British workers, but the French gave it a name, so it's solidarity. Marx wrote this principle into the rules of the First International, the founding organisation of socialism, having borrowed it from the Chartists, the first working-class mass party in history, and he supplemented it with the explanation that the only barrier hitherto to the victory of socialism was the absence of solidarity. Right? So this makes it very clear. Solidarity is the foundation and essential concrete meaning of socialism. Now, I attach a very specific meaning. It's necessary to socialism. It means, to solidarity. It means this. If one party wishes to go to the aid of another party, they do so under the direction of the other party. Right? So if you turn up to support a picket line, you don't bring your own methods of operating a picket line. You know, there may be all sorts of factors. If the person running the picket line says, no, we don't block cars here, we just hand out leaflets, that's what you do, because it's their picket line. If you can't go along with some struggle, their views are so off the planet, and there are plenty of oppressed people that have silly ideas that you can't go along with, well, make a donation to their fighting fund. You send them a letter of support, right? But you don't help people by imposing your own ideas and methods and practices. That's called colonization.
You're not being a comrade. Right? You're being a colonizer.
Yeah. And what I see of the American left is that this concept has almost been lost. I'd note the concept of intersectionality is the nearest we come to solidarity. The idea that, I mean, this is the thing about American politics. Nowhere else in the world would anyone have any idea which way white suburban women without a college degree voted, right? Or black men over 30. You know, the American political scientists have divided the population into these abstract categories, right? like a Linnaean taxonomy, and then count their votes in a pure image of the method of bureaucracy, Yeah,
Yeah,
the very method of thinking which Hegel stood against.
mm-hmm.
And the thing is that as abstract and annoying and wrong as it is, this method penetrates the American consciousness. So solidarity has become, white suburban women without college degrees should stick up to black men who are unemployed or something,
Mm-hmm.
that you're in this section, I'm in that section, and we should stick together. It's a fair, step towards solidarity, and it's a good thing. And the fact that the young people understand intersectionality is good, but it reflects where you're coming from. Yeah?
Well, it hits on, those two big points of like, it's, since the dominant, ruling class is kind of able to eke out these terms that we can kind of have the debate between, like in the American left, it's automatically constrained because it's you're trying to debate a false viewpoint, and then the downside of it is just like you say, where then especially with like the uprisings going on right now. I mean, like a positive example of it would be something like in Portland for a very long time there were really good stories of people showing up to protest that wouldn't usually protest and doing the things that you're describing, where, okay, we're going to have direct action against the police. So we know we're going to be tear gassed. So you need guys with leaf blowers out there, and these dads from the suburbs would come.
Look, one of the things I've noticed from this side of the Pacific is that really in an unprecedented way, not only in Portland, the People's Republic of Portland,
right,
but everywhere across the states, like white people are turning up to anti-racist marches, Black Lives Matter marches, and that there is really this version of intersectionality, this American sort of variant of solidarity, has penetrated very deeply, and the sort of practices of speaking, and deferring to women if there's too many male speakers. All these things are not just niche practices, but have penetrated very deeply. And people from my generation can't get away. As an old man, white man, standing up and explaining everything to the young people. You just can't get away with that now. And these are good things.
Mm-hmm. It is that so much of the conversation's been distorted by the fact of this kind of like quantified idea of, and you go into this in one of your other articles, but the idea of a quantified social capital, something that you could give to somebody as a Likert scale and just determine the community's level of social capital, and then maybe you could then quantify.
James Coleman was one of the early theorists of social capital, and his view is quite different from Robert Putnam's view. Robert Putnam, I think, is the guy that really popularized the idea. But for James Coleman, in 1968, he wrote a PhD on the monetary value of a vote and actually advocated that people should be able to literally buy votes, right? Because he made the observation that if you're a poor person, you'd rather have $10 than cast a vote which you knew was useless, right? And in actual fact, the most clearest example of social capital is how the mafia works.
Right.
And there's a story of the mafia guy arriving in a city for the first time, buying a little office and a telephone and sitting in his office, and people would phone him and ask for a favor, and he'd do people a favor. And he, of course, became wealthy in terms of people that owed him a favor. And then later on, you cash in the favor. Oh, I helped you solve that problem, about your landlord. Look, I've got this guy, and he's causing me some trouble. I would like you to eliminate him, and it's a fact of life among the really poor and excluded that they're cut out of monetary wealth, and they accumulate this wealth in the form of exchangeable favors. And I thought that was a good insight. but you have to be conscious of where that's going. It's going to cause corruption.
Right. Social capital.
Doing people favors in exchange.
Yeah, it actually can't operate on the very premises that capital would assume, that it theoretically has to operate on. It can't actually deliver on its claim. So in the sense that
well, it's a bad concept, really, because there are, say, James Coleman's conception is a genuinely exchangeable commodity. You do someone a favour, you ask for a favour back. So it takes that test of being an exchangeable form of wealth, right? But Robert Putnam's version of capital, social capital, which is contained in a town where there are lots of choirs and where everyone goes along to junior soccer and so on, right? Now, that's not an exchangeable commodity. It just simply represents, a very rich and powerful social fabric, right? Which the thing is that the problem comes in trying to turn it into economics for the political reason that you can better sell it to capitalist-controlled governments if you express it in a dollar term, and that doesn't work. Why not simply advocate repair and strengthening of the social fabric? Why do you have to, Marx's discovery when he wrote Das Kapital was that capital is simply a social relation. And then 150 years later, people come along and discover that social relations are a form of capital. Thank you, shows how far we've come.
So, and then the other thing I wanted to talk about too then, is solidarity is a distinct type of activity. And I think it would be, it's useful to understand, like, why is solidarity different from me just helping someone?
It's different from, you are helping someone, and if you're not helping someone, it's not solidarity, but it's helping someone according to their lights, right? So, for example, the Jacobin magazine has taken a position that it will not advocate or work for a Biden election, right? I understand why you wouldn't want to work for a Biden election, but what you've got is whole sections of people who, for instance, are liable to deportation, people that are facing having no health care under very serious conditions, and electing Biden could solve their problem. And rightly or wrongly, they deserve help, and their view is a big turnout to vote for Biden would help them. Now, if you go along and say, one's as bad as the other, don't have illusions in Biden, that's not solidarity. You're not helping them by advising them and trying to rid them of their illusions. Because, look, I'll tell you, I'll rid you of your illusions. That is antithetical to socialism, and all you're going to do that way is wind up a small, isolated sect that everybody hates, if we want to do away with people's illusions. But I wouldn't say that to you because I know it doesn't help you. It doesn't align with your project to tell you that you're wrong. But solidarity in the case of the U.S. election for someone on the left who knows Biden's record, knows the record of the Democratic Party, knows that gains for majority of people are going to be extremely limited, but understands that for a hell of a lot of people that are potential supporters, the organized working class, the black and Latino communities, this is an important thing. Then you give them solidarity. You say, look, I don't entirely agree with you, but I'll come down, I'll hand out leaflets, I'll do this. We'll ask people on our magazine and our website to vote for Biden, and we'll put in our thing how we're warning about it. We're going to tell people to grit your teeth, swallow your pride, and turn out to vote for Biden, and make sure your neighbours do too. Now, that's solidarity, and someone that doesn't see things your way, that actually thinks there's going to be a big improvement in their life if Biden gets elected, will remember that when they had their backs against the wall facing another term of Trump, that you supported them. And you did tell them that they were going to be disappointed, but you still turned out and stood with them in what they were doing. He's got to make a distinction between doing something and thinking something, right? Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, I have a niece who is very interested in indigenous knowledge, land care, and so on. She's also interested in Buddhism, and she's also, got a degree in wildlife ecology, in science. Right? Now, she's a bit confused. She's got three absolutely antithetical ideologies, the practices of each of which she wants to support. She likes the peacefulness and sublimity of Buddhism. She loves the Aboriginals' connection to their land and their ability to successfully make apparently barren land abundant and to make land that burns in bushfires every year not burn with bushfires, right? And she likes science. So what you have to do, you have to look at what people do and incorporate these actions through solidarity into your own practices, and you've got to work out how, your own ideas, how to integrate this into a coherent view. But so helping people that hate Trump make sure that he doesn't get elected doesn't mean you have to adopt their political beliefs, but it does require you to stand by them and act in solidarity with them and make sure Trump doesn't get elected. And confusion about that matter is confusion about the very essence of socialism.
I think it speaks to really the dynamic qualities of solidarity, right? We're talking about something that is constantly in flux, I would break it down to even like seconds or minutes, right? These are things that we're constructing within the moment. And I think that's something that's often lost, at least in the conversations over here, is that it almost gets framed as like this static process where...
look, the thing is, if every person in the world acted according to the duty of solidarity, that's called socialism. Right? You don't have to worry about the institutions, the laws, questions of inequality or equality, racism, anti-discrimination, anything. If everybody observed the principle of solidarity, then you have socialism. So that's a wonderful guide to practice, because we all have different views. It's a product of this neoliberal fragmentation of society. Everyone not only has their own set of facts, of course they have their own views. How do you work together if everyone's got a different theory of history? If everyone's big question has to be solved tomorrow is different. Well, the principle lies in ethics, really. I'll say the central ethical principle is solidarity. But before we get to that, how we work together is an ethical question, right? Not a theoretical question. So, for example, let's take Marxist Internet Archive. That originated with a guy who rightly resented the fact that the only thing anyone could ever find out about Marx was what he read in the right-wing press or came out of the Chinese or Russian, or Stalinist sort of bureaucracies, and the actual words of Marx, the actual views of Marx were unknown. So he set up a little site called Marx.org and copy-typed or scanned, I don't think they had scanners then, but he copy-typed major works and put them on the internet. Now, he was joined by a group of Trotskyists who felt the same about Trotsky. Right? He left at that point because he was one of the, pure Marx, after Marx, nothing, right? But the Trotskyists, agreed with that. And then as it went on, you had, we've got social democrats, anarchists, supporters of Kim Jong-il, every variety, of left politics, and left in the most generous interpretation of it, and people who are interested in things that are nothing to do with left politics. I'm interested in Hegel, so we've got the best English language Hegel site there. All the Hegelians that hate Marxism still go to that site, right? We've got a great archive of feminist literature,
Mm-hmm.
You know? And most feminist literature, unfortunately, is copyrighted. There's a history to that. Communists tended to immediately put their stuff into the public domain, but the history of the exploitation of domestic labour and so on meant that those women were tended to be very precious about their intellectual products.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite difficult to negotiate how much and what you can republish. So we've got that. We've got the best archive and the only, in fact, complete archives of Stalin and Mao. But Stalin and Mao are minority views on Marxist Internet Archive. But it's been Trotskyists that have meticulously made sure that there are no missing documents in the Stalin and Mao archives, right? That everything gets published, even the things that they don't want to be published, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to know about Stalin and Mao, you have to go to the Marxist Internet Archive. Now, that was not worked out in advance. Like, we've got an ethical principle called solidarity. Mm-hmm. We all agree we want to preserve the works of the great revolutionaries of the past, but we don't agree on who's a revolutionary. Therefore, we'll develop this ethical principle, or we will all support each other within certain constraints, no fascism, no racism, no judgmental, no judgments in editorial, like here's the archive of William Z. Foster. He was a Stalinist, but still, no, none of that. Mm-hmm. Just very straight. So we worked out over a period of 25 years. No, I mean, probably 10 years, but there have been solid rules for at least the last 15 years.
90,
really,
right?
Yeah, it's based on solidarity. So everyone knows that, well, most people, you get these occasional attacks from people that have discovered, footnotes copied over from an old Progress publication that are not a bit dodgy, but people know that we have a job to do and we don't make judgments, and you can find it there. We don't exclude anyone that anyone else might think is relevant to Marxism. And the result is something that will outlive all of us. We've got many gigabytes of data there, right? We've got 60, I think, last count, about 60 languages.
Yeah.
62, is it?
I think 62,
You've got to keep an eye on these languages. They keep growing. Yeah. And our list of volunteers, I don't know. I used to maintain that list at one point. I've stepped back from that role. But there's hundreds of them. People come in, their favourite Marxists, they build their archive, then they get a bit sick of it, they move on. Someone else comes on, might add a bit to it, and people come and go. Mm-hmm. But it's a product which will outlive all of us.
As a resource,
I've got academic friends that don't agree with us. They want to say all sorts of things about Marxism from an academic point of view, but they'll still go there because all the historical documents are there. You can't write something about the history of the socialist movement or Marxist movement without using those resources. So that's sort of an example of how ethics, being deeper than politics, transcends politics. Mm-hmm. And that if you have a firm, shared ethical foundation for working together with other people, that transcends differences over theory and of history and so on, right? So when you have one of these big demonstrations, Seattle in 1999, you have all these different people that all want to say, let's all make an event at this place on this day. Some of them are farmers that want protectionism. Others are socialists, third worlders, all sorts of anarchists, communists, trade unions, all different. But they work out a way to not step on each other's toes and act together despite theoretical differences. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the nature of it has got limitations. As soon as the people running the conference decide, they're going to move to a different venue or they're going to close an hour early, the agreement falls apart, of course. The basis of the agreement is extremely limited. So it takes time to develop those principles, to actually work out how to make a reality of solidarity. But it's a principle which naturally, that's what we talk, in this theory that I'm a part of. You talk about germ cells. You have this unit, which is a simple concrete practice, an act, like exchange of commodities, which is the act which develops into a market economy. So you have a simple act of solidarity, and that develops, and it develops really, in actual practice. And a theoretician who's observing that can observe the concrete development of the practice. I observe intersectionality, and I can relate that. I didn't invent the idea of intersectionality. I learn about it by observing politics in your country and these things. So then the theory of it can develop as the practice develops based on what people actually do. But the starting point has to be a commitment to this principle of solidarity as an ethical duty, if you like, understanding that the ethics has to underlie, shared ethics has to underlie any kind of cooperation with other people. You can disagree about everything, but you have to have a basis of ethics if you're going to work together with other people.
Yeah, I had like a funny experience of that, like in action, where so there was this march a while ago now. But so pretty big. I mean, there was a couple hundred people, and there were kind of like two main groups of organizers at that time. The one group really wanted to go and march through neighborhoods. They wanted the people in the neighborhoods to see, we're a part of you. We this is why we're coming through. The other group wanted to go a different route, which was just more, it also had advantages. It was more public. So there was more street traffic, more people would see the march. And they also had like a really cool car that was like playing like really good techno music. So you had like kind of like this really funny thing where it was like half the group is like, well, we kind of want to go with like the cool car and like people are going to actually see us. And then you have like this other half that's like, and anyway, the thing that wound up kind of becoming the rallying point was everybody could kind of agree that it diverted the cops, because then they had to follow two different groups that were going two different directions.
So I think of the children, it would be better if we lived apart.
But the Internet Archive is just so hugely important. I mean, I know for me that was I saw a few spears in college, and was able to find that website and really start to like dig into the actual texts and really precise translations. Like things are updated very well by like I know Verajov is like translated a few things, and his translations are awesome.
When I first started out, so I'm talking about 1997, right? And I had the problem of how was I going to learn about Hegel, because I didn't know how to find anyone to talk to. Subsequently, I know there are quite a few academics that are interested in Hegel, but I wasn't in academia and I didn't know. So I thought, well, I'll copy type. It didn't have a scanner. So I started just typing up tracks out of Hegel and classic tracks of Marxism as well. This is before I met Marxists in the archive. And I wrote in principle, if you put up a honeypot, if you create something which is attractive to people, then they'll come. You know, I know there's a movie on that basic idea, but I've had like some academic friends that are a bit jealous of the fact that I get all this interaction with people over the world, but, I don't have any of the academic credentials that they, all the sort of publications and books and so on, because I said, well, look, why don't you, what's your interest? Okay, you think this writer's important. Why don't you transcribe all their works, maybe set up a glossary of their key terms and put it up on the internet? And people will come and visit that site, and they'll think you're an expert in that person, and they will ask you questions about it. And away you go. You'll develop a reputation, This is how it's done. So, I put up this text on Hegel. I was ignorant of Hegel, didn't know very much at all. But people see this site, and at that stage in 1997, you couldn't get sort of important historical texts on the internet at all. That's something that came later. So this was early on. For 4 or 5 years, this site was a place to come. And so I had all these interactions with people from all over the world that showed me other, things, other people that had analysed Hegel, other tendencies, really sort of led me through it, a random, anonymous group of visitors that I had interactions with, and that was my education. And the basis of education was that I provided them with these texts that they could search. For example, you might have all the books on your bookshelf, but you can't do a Google search on them or a Yahoo search, as it would have been in those days, right? So it's a simple sort of principle, You meet someone else's need, and, this is going even lower than solidarity, the principle of what do you call it, mutuality.
Right.
Which predates the modern workers' movement. Mutuality goes back to the very dawn. In fact, it goes back to the origin of the bourgeoisie. Just sticking to British history, which I know better, before the Norman conquest, the merchants, talking just about merchants at that point, the earliest bourgeoisie could be hunted like wild animals, because away from their land, and they didn't have land, and away from the lord of their property, they were outside the law, right? So if some merchant travelled to the other end of England to sell the cloth they had, they could be robbed or hunted like a wild animal, because they were outside the structure, right? So their reaction was they set up these guilds, merchants' guilds, right? Where if one of them died, 100 miles from home, the others would club together to bring their body back for a funeral and provide a pension for their widow. If their property burnt down, they would, fire insurance basically, and also conviviality. They set up taverns and things to meet your mates. Now, it was basically based on a principle of solidarity. So I should mention that solidarity, although it's the founding principle of socialism, it predates the working class by a good 1,000 years, right? Because the bourgeoisie back in the year sort of 947 or something it was really, a subordinate class. I mean, okay, 500 years later, you had wealthy people, and the aristocracy had to come to them to borrow money. But in the earliest days, they were really oppressed, and they survived on the basis of solidarity was expressed in the principle of one man, one vote. And it was man at that stage, one person, one vote, we'd say today. That's the basic expression of solidarity, because it means that you vote and decide on an issue and you get outvoted. Of course, if you go your own way, that destroys the agreement. So the principle of solidarity is that you go along with the majority. And so that often leads to a sort of misunderstanding in the meaning of solidarity. People think it just means being solid. And that's a part of it, but it's not the only part of it, right?
There's got to be some elasticity involved in the whole thing too.
But it means tolerance as well.
Right.
The majority rule means I've been members of unions and in sort of shop stewards or medium level representative unions run by the right wing. People I loathe, real animals, but never in any case did I find that if I got into trouble at work, the union wasn't going to be there for me. I always knew the union would be there for me, even though I was a pariah within the union because, I was a Trotskyist and I was always criticizing them and so on. But we all knew that whoever was in trouble, the union would be there for them, right? And even the right-wingers in the union tolerated the troublemakers, right? Whereas, for instance, in the sort of anarchistic movements that decide things by consensus, there's no tolerance at all. Because if you dissent, you don't have to go along with the majority. You just go off on your own, like you were describing. You say, well, you want to march through town with the music. You want to march through the suburbs and scare the shit out of the suburban people. We'll go our own way. You don't have a vote on it, and then the minority has to march through town, even though they wanted to go through the suburbs. You just go your own way. That's the modern ethos. It's that sort of compromise you make in order to continue working together at what level you're able to. So in saying that, I'm not saying that one method of making decisions is superior to another.
Right. It's not evaluative.
No, they have their place, and each of them foster certain virtues. When I tried to introduce consensus into a science that was formed in about 1992 in Melbourne, which had various sort of Marxist groups and anarchists in it, it fell over on the question of consensus because the Marxists simply refused to go along with consensus. And I said, look, how do you expect this alliance to last more than a day if this group of anarchists we've got with us are going to be outvoted every time by a larger number of Marxists? It's just not going to work. So if you want to have the alliance, it has to be on the basis of unanimous agreement. Otherwise, you don't have an alliance. No, it's unprincipled. You could do it, whatever. And so the thing broke down. But it's just to realize you can have your majority vote in your union, but if you want to make an alliance with a completely non-union group, for example, or a different union for that matter, it has to be on the basis if you do only what you both agree to do. It's a different principle than the principle applies within a union where you do what the majority decides. And you have to be able to move freely between those different ethics and those different modes of decision.
Yeah, and that's sort of like unidirectional position taking that I think we sometimes find ourselves in, especially in education, is really unhelpful.
Exactly.
I think it's sort of the point that I think we've been talking about, is that it actually inhibits solidarity. It prevents you from being able to model what true solidarity looks like.
Yeah, because it's putting up some principle, an ethical principle, not as a means of cooperating with somebody else, but as an actual barrier to cooperating. Oh, I believe in X. X is very important to me, therefore I can't go along with you. Well, that can be the case. If you've got some worker who's decided that having black people employed in the thing is undermining the wage rates or something and wants to exclude blacks, I said, sorry, I can't have any part of that. But, if you decide to do it differently, here's my card, come and see me,
Right. I've seen it in education, specifically here, where so my wife's situation is such that she's teaching kids virtually. So all completely online. And the school district has also decided to have some kids for face-to-face instruction. So they're actually coming into the school building. So
yeah, we have mixture here as well.
Yeah. So, but my wife still has to go into the school building to do the virtual instruction, which is like absurd for a number of reasons. The main reason is just that, we're in a country that can't control the pandemic. And so we're going to have death totals that are going to eclipse 300,000 without any doubt. And the face-to-face teachers disagree with so there's been different, we still have teacher unions to some degree. So the virtual teachers have been making the case, we can do this job from home. There's a deadly pandemic. We should be at home. And the face-to-face teachers have fought it on the basis of, I would say a principle, but I don't think it's a principle, is that if we're required to come in here, you're also required to come in here. If we're risking our lives, goddammit, you're getting it on it too. So right, it's these
I
absurd...
think there needs to be some negotiating around that principle.
Right.
Because the basic problem is that there's no commitment to solve the pandemic. So, of course, the damage comes out everywhere. You know? We have certain people that go into a workplace because it's just not viable. You know, the country can't live without things being delivered and certain products being produced. But you compensate for that by introducing conditions in the workplace that defend people from catching the virus. And it's not infallible, and there have been mistakes along the road, you know. But if you're asking people to come into work, then you've got to set up, you know, these barriers between people, give people separate rooms, you know, whatever's necessary to protect people from the virus. You can't do what I know is happening in the US, where people are told, well, if you don't come into work, you're not getting a wage, and people come into work with the virus. Right. And then you end up, everyone's got the virus. I mean, it's just insanity. It's crazy.
I wanted to close on, I think I think it'll be pretty positive, I hope. I've heard one of the interviews when you talk about kind of your initial protests against the draft and the burning of the draft card and stuff. I heard you briefly talk about your own parents. If I'm recalling it correctly, you also talked about then how you understood it differently after you kind of got to know your parents in a different way. And I know my given the current crisis and everything, my own relationship with my children is really front and center in my mind. And I think about how they're going to recall this time, how they're going to recall me in this time.
My parents, Betty and Ralph Blunden, were communists. They became communists in a workplace where the Communist Party was very prominent. But I think the Communist Party was made illegal for a brief period in about 1941 when the Soviet Union was on the anti-war position. And so my mother was pregnant and she decided she couldn't risk belonging to an illegal party while she was carrying a child. She resigned, but she always remained, to the dying day, she was a supporter of Mao. Right? She would end up close to the Maoists. Been to China a couple of times. My father remained loyal to the main sort of Communist Party up until 1956. And the suppression of the Hungarian Revolution was a one too far for him. I can dimly remember from my childhood what must have been Communist Party meetings being held in my living room. But I had no idea as a small child then, you know, like in single figures, what was going on. So I didn't think the being progressive people at that time, they believed children should make up their own mind. Right? So consequently, they never talked to me about communism. They just let me find my own way. I had no idea that they were communists, right? And I left home as soon as I met a woman that I could go to bed with. I shacked up with her. So that was, I think, just turned 19, and I was off and away. Living, I still don't know how I managed to eat in those times. I wouldn't accept money off my parents. I don't know. Somehow or other I managed. And then this business of conscription came along. And I thought, no way. You know, you're getting me involved in this. And you know, I became political for the first time. I went and and read the Geneva Convention, you know, which had finished the French intervention in Vietnam. And it says that it doesn't give any right for Americans to go in. There's going to be an election, you know, by 1958 or something. Obviously, Ho Chi Minh was going to be. This is completely, you know, absolutely illegal. This war, and you know, you see the peasants being chased into these barbed wire compounds by American soldiers, and the voiceover will be saying out, "Oh, how the Americans are protecting these local people from the Viet Cong." So you're joking. Okay, so I developed my own view, and I burnt my draft card. I'd spoken to the Youth Campaign Against Conscription, said, look, they're doing this in the States, and it's a good idea. I want to burn my draft card, but I want to do it as part of a group. So a few weeks later, they came back. I found another group, a couple of other guys. So we all burned our draft cards, and my mother read about it in the paper, and they were delighted. They were over the moon, right? And I didn't tell them because I thought they were going to be parents and say, oh, don't do that, you'll get into trouble and things. Not at all. Mm-hmm. Okay. So they stuck with me, and they brought in this QC, who was a member of the Communist Party, but had defended the Communist Party against attempts to illegalize it, to defend me in the local magistrates' court round the corner, you know. And the magistrates bowing down, yes, sir, you know, virtually calling my lawyer, Your Honour, right? It was quite an experience. And I got fined, that's all. The youth campaign paid the money. But in the meantime, my parents organised to get me out of the country. They got my health tabs so I could leave the country. I already had a passport because I was planning to run off, you know, and catch a boat to Kuwait or something, which was the fashion at the time. Fantasy, of course, total fantasy. And so I left, and I went to Europe, and I didn't come back for more than 19 years. And I only really discussed politics after that time, after I'd already left the country, really to have political conversation with my parents. They were an earlier generation, you know, that they believed that socialist utopia was being built in the Soviet Union. Of course, Hungary shattered that, but they believed in the myth. You know, I'd seen enough. I regarded the Communist Party really as a reactionary party. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And it took me a long time. It wasn't until 1973 in England that I joined a Trotskyist party. I was difficult to tie down. But eventually there was a guy there at the workplace where I was working as a teacher who argued and argued and argued with me. And eventually I ran out of arguments. I ran out of reasons, you know, not to join his particular party, and so I did. So I then experienced, you know, whatever it was, 13 years as a loyal member of a Trotskyist party in East London. You know, I don't regret it because you learn a lot of things out of that. Time probably could have been better spent, but that's life, isn't it? You know?
Yeah.
By the time, you know, I returned to Australia, I was ready to start looking into things on myself, developing my own reading list and trying to really orient myself without sticking to the party's reading list.
Rock on, man. Thank you so much, Andy.